Drinking coffee?
Tea.
Tea. I knew it. I knew you'd be a tea drinker. I knew you'd be. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so live stream, Yeti stereo mic, Logitech stream cam. Excellent, mate. All good. Ready to go? Okay. Welcome back to the Coaches to the Moon podcast, ladies and gentlemen. First episode in a couple of weeks. My family's been sick and it's been very, very rough. But today I'm back and I'm very excited to be joined by mindfulness and high performance coach Melo Calarco. So after cycling and traveling 30,000 kilometers around the world on his mountain bike, Melo is now a high performance coach teaching mindfulness and meditation. He's also the author of the book Beating Burnout: Mindful Lessons for a Meaningful Life, where he shares the secrets to thriving as a high achiever and an effective leader. I cannot wait to talk to you today, Melo, all the way from Melbourne. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Alex, and I hope you get better soon, and I hope the girls get better soon. Not much fun, I
Yeah.
know, with young ones in the house, but hang in there, brother.
Oh, we're not. We're used to it. We're out of the woods, and we go on holiday soon, and it's been great for my physique because I've barely eaten this week. So just shredding fat like no one's business. So I couldn't be happier. So mate, I was listening to a few of the podcasts you've done. And I heard the man himself, Kerwin Ray, describe you as mellow by name, mellow by nature, and I couldn't agree more. But I'd love to know, what were you like as a kid, and is it pretty similar or more of a far cry from the mindful man that you are today?
Adventurous in many ways, always searching and pushing the boundaries. A little bit rebellious, I would say. This is for your ears only, everybody out there. I've been expelled from a couple of schools, and a bit of a naughty boy at school, probably because I was a bit bored, to be honest. A bit bored
Mm.
with the system, bored with things. So always sort of pushing the boundaries. Never harmed anybody, to be honest, but just wanted more out of life in many ways. So the education system bored me, so I found other ways to entertain myself. And then, just growing up in South Australia, actually, it's a bit of a small town in some ways, small town mentality, and I guess I needed to break out of that. And when I did decide to go cycling around the world on my mountain bike, you can imagine all my friends in Adelaide and family saying, "No, Melo, you're crazy. Don't do it." Which actually drove me and inspired me even more to do it. So that childhood sort of adventure spirit has never left me.
That's a tale as old as time with entrepreneurs, isn't it? That always a little bit naughty, never malicious, never malfeasant, but always kind of not square peg in a round hole situation. I was exactly the same. Bored. I was always the head of the year's office or the headmaster's office, up to no good, but performing well at school and constantly the bane of my teacher's existence, I'd imagine. So you segued nicely into what I wanted to start off with, which was, something I'm sure you've never spoken about before, which is your 30,000 kilometer trek around the world on your bike. So apart from, being a slap in the face to the naysayers, what was your inspiration to take something on that was so huge?
Yeah, again, I wanted more out of life in many ways. So at the time, I was working in pretty average jobs, not really meaningful jobs, just doing anything just to pay bills and work. Probably a bit purposeless and directionless at the time. And I was doing a lot of internal discovery, self-discovery, a lot of meditation, practicing internal arts, Shaolin Kung Fu, Chen style Tai Chi, and a lot of meditation. And I was really inspired to learn more. So, part of the journey and part of the planning was to stay in monasteries and temples along the way, and live with monks and um, wherever I was on the planet, to spend a lot of time with them and immerse myself into the spiritual practices. So in some ways, it was a spiritual quest. In some ways, a personal discovery quest, and in some ways, it was just a way to get out there and break the mold in many ways. So lots of things inspired me, and that planned it. We just finished a mountain bike riding thing, and five of us sat around the table and said, "Hey, let's go cycle around the world." And it was all so exciting. And one by one, unfortunately, they all bailed on me, for whatever reason. Whether it was getting the maps out of Africa and looking at Nigeria and things like that. So, oh my God, that's too dangerous. So I ended up doing it solo, and I'm so glad I did, because I could do things at my own pace. I could go where I wanted to. I could stay longer where I wanted to, and I could really learn more about myself, to be honest.
Well, it does sound like a real sense of freedom. How old were you at the time?
A bit younger than now, not much younger. Probably about 15 years ago when it all started,
Okay,
roundabout. So yeah, and those lessons that I learned on the road still serve me well today. Like
I
all those
bet.
lessons that I learned. So
I bet. No, that's really exciting, man. And you mentioned hanging out in monasteries, the OGs of meditating. You mentioned that you went to places like Nepal. I know that Nepal, my mum's been there a few times. She's done some mountain climbing. You see prayer flags everywhere, but I imagine that a lot of the different locations you went to, the meditation was actually coming from a different religion or spirituality. But I imagine that there's also a common thread between all of them. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
yeah, that's right. So from the deep jungles of Africa to pygmy tribes to the high mountains of the Himalaya, there's always different spiritual practices. Some of them are quite primal. Some of them are really archaic and sort of voodoo medicine and crazy sort of rituals and things that you'd see in Africa. And then you head up to the high Himalaya, and you mentioned Nepal, but I also travelled up through a place called Ladakh. Ladakh is the North Indian Himalaya, so it's on the Tibetan plateau. And up there in those high monasteries, very isolated from the rest of the world, some of the purest forms of Buddhism on the planet, still exist there. So, Buddhism has many branches in many ways, and learning from the source up there and staying there and living there and immersing myself in those practices was pretty special in many ways. And yeah, there are common threads, opposites in many, there are common threads that come through it, and a lot of it is meditation, self-awareness, self-regulation, and a lot of these practices that I continue to practice today and develop my own practice from gathering
Mm.
the best from each of them in many ways, the best of the Eastern philosophies, and some of the best of the Western and everything in between. And my goal in the work that I do is to make it accessible, to make it
Yeah.
learnable and practical in many ways. So yes,
Yeah.
those experiences were amazing, I must say.
Well, I'd love to get into some of those practical tips in a moment, but on the
Yeah.
experiences, on your website, you mentioned a few near-death experiences, which I can't skim over. Can you give us a juicy story and how that affected you at the time and moving forwards?
Yeah, there's a few that come to mind, and obviously cycling and traveling and trekking around the world, and especially in those developing countries, in many ways, there's threats, there's dangers that come through. I always trusted myself, though, that I always had the resources in any situation, and that comes with meditation and practice. Um, a few come to mind. You mentioned Nepal there, where Nepal, I was actually in Kathmandu when the whole royal family was assassinated. So I'm not sure if you remember, it was around 2001, 2002, 2001. The whole royal family. So the son of the king came in dressed in his military fatigues into the royal palace and gunned down the whole royal family, killed everybody basically, and then he shot himself with a machine gun. And so the whole of Kathmandu turned into a very different place than it was. This peaceful Himalayan kingdom. It turned into a rioting, crazy political unrest and a whole crazy thing going on there. So my partner and I, we actually were going out to the funeral of the king because the Nepalese people loved the king. They really revered the king, King Birendra, and it was all peaceful. It was all beautiful. It was all nice, and then suddenly something turned, something changed, and big rocks being machine gun activity going on. There was just tear gas and smoke, and everybody running in all crazy directions in all ways. And I didn't know what to do. It was my first experience with gunshot and shooting, and couldn't understand the language. I didn't know which way to go, run, fight, flight, whatever it was. So somehow, some from Kathmandu area and actually motioned us to follow him. He said, namaste, I recognize you, I'll help you. And we actually turned towards my natural instinct, sorry, was to run away, like to run from the crowd. And I tried to actually, I was just about to kick in a door of a small home, and just as I was about to kick in the door, I saw this little old lady peek out the window, and I thought, I better not kick that door in. She's also scared. So this guy motioned us to sort of turn towards the crowd, actually. So there's a crazy crowd coming towards us, and we turned towards it, which scared the hell out of me. but I trusted him, so I put my trust in this guy. And then he led us down this little path, and wading through sewerage deep rivers and things to get our way back to Kathmandu and Tamil. So definitely very close to death in that way. There was machine gun, there was rocks going everywhere. It was a shoot at site curfews were in place. Military convoys were around. So very much situation. The lesson, especially from this guy, was to turn towards your fear. Like, turn towards it. This thing that's coming towards us is a angry mob coming towards us, instead of running, actually to turn towards. And that served me really well for many other things that I encountered along the way.
What a brilliant analogy that is. My word, mate.
Mm.
That's and that being just one of a few stories, it it sometimes makes me, when I hear stories like that, think, how would I go in situations like that? And especially since I've had my daughters and it's me with
Mm.
three females in the house. I've kind of gone a bit hyper masculine since my daughters were born, and I was, and everyone notices it. I'm growing a bigger beard. I'm kind of like lifting more weights and stuff. And I always wonder, how would I go in that situation? Do you feel, when you look back at those moments, well, how do you feel about the way that you performed in these near death experiences?
Again, I trusted myself. I love traveling in developing countries. I love being, in difficult situations, whether it is machine guns in my ribs or a knife to my throat or some, thing I needed to negotiate, because you actually feel most alive. You actually feel most alert and alive, and your senses are on high alert. I love those situations, but I must say, since becoming a father myself, and I have two beautiful daughters, turning into teenage daughters now, obviously the balls change, the rules have changed a little bit, so there's more than just me to look after. But I still have that same attitude where, always trusting that I'd have the right resources inside of me to deal with any situation, no matter what life throws at you. And especially, protecting your daughters, you do anything to do that. So, um, yeah, and that's one thing that happens with doing a lot of meditation and mindfulness practices, and sort of getting to know yourself on a deeper level, getting to know your pain points, getting to know the things that push you, getting to know your limits, and getting to be limitless, love more than we actually believe we are. I caught malaria also in Africa, nearly killed me. And in Benin, I lost like 10 kilos in like a week. So yeah, again, with a bit of purpose and perseverance, got through that. Yeah, so a few situations that I've been pushed to the edge, but again, believing in yourself, trusting yourself, and knowing that no matter what life throws at you, you can deal with it.
That's great, man. And I imagine that having two teenage daughters is as scary as any near death experience. So, best of luck for that one. Speaking of children, you put a particular focus on being touched by the resilience and the strength of children in these developing countries that you've been to, as opposed to my kids who can sit there watching Peppa Pig and have whatever they want at a moment's notice. So, how has that experience influenced your coaching, your charity work, and also what are some of the projects that you're most proud of in terms of working with these kids?
Yeah, I was definitely touched by the kids in many ways, especially in Africa, for example, in some of the most war-torn villages in, Rwanda or Uganda, or all through the regions of Africa. Somehow the kids managed to smile. Somehow they managed to be beaming with energy, and that was infectious, and that really affected me in many ways. There's a joke going around whenever I was with other travelers, because even though I cycled alone, I also went off my bike and went, in different ways, and met other people and traveled with other people. There was a joke among the my people that I traveled with: if you couldn't find Melo, just look for the group of kids somewhere in some little village, and he's probably right in the middle of them, playing games and having fun. And that really inspired me in many ways. They have nothing. They seemingly have nothing. They're poor. They hardly have clothes on their back, but they still manage to be resilient and happy and joyful. And they could play with a stick and a broken tire from a bicycle for hours on end, and just grateful for everything around them. So I learned a lot from them, and definitely wanted to give back. And my wife and I are involved in an orphanage or a place in Tanzania with another friend of ours from Holland who give back to the children and get them some education. Wherever I can, I'm always giving back. And how that translates into my work here is to be grateful, for the little things and to be grateful for the things around you. And I always find it a struggle when I travel in a developing country and I come back, being very affluent, working with CEOs, executives who might be complaining about some of the most worst first world problems that are on their mind. It takes me about a week or two to actually negotiate that before I, because I'm thinking, well, back in Africa, they're dying, they don't have food on their back, and here you are complaining about the color of your curtains in your holiday home. Like it's a valid reason for them. So I have to be careful not to bring that into my coaching. So being mindful, listening is always a good skill, and sharing some of the joy and simplicity of gratitude.
We only know what we know, right? So I feel like that's how these kids in these really, really impoverished situations can smile, and that's why people who are so, hit the absolute sperm lottery to be born in one of the top 5 countries in the world, for example, we've not worked for that. And now that we're here, it can be easy to get pissed off if your Uber Eats is cold or if your Wi-Fi goes down, that sort of thing. Because we only know what we know. But you, I imagine, have a really unique perception of that because of the experiences you had. So, moving on to meditation and mindfulness, you've been in this space for about 25 years now. I'm interested to know how you've seen the public perception of meditation and mindfulness change over that time, and where do you see the future of these concepts going in the next few years?
Yeah, it's still a long way to go, but it is definitely being more accepted, and especially in the high performance world. I've been practicing meditation myself personally for about 30 years, actually. I initially entered through martial arts, actually, many years ago, and I quickly learned that the power of the mind was as important, if not more important, than the strength and power of the body. So it's a practice that I've been continuing on for many years in many guises. Um, Definitely 20 years ago, it would have been harder to go into a corporate industry and talk about speculation of I still meet that today, to be honest, depending on the industry. I know I've walked into engineering companies, for example, and I start talking about mindfulness, and they're all folding their arms and thinking, "This is not for me, really," or they're expecting incense and dreadlocks and all those sort of things. So we still have a bit of that preconception. It's still there. So to be honest, when I'm working in a corporate environment, I rarely use the word meditation itself. I say things like, let's go train our attention, let's go refocus, let's go reset, let's go improve our performance. So this is the consequence of meditating. Once I get them over the line, then we can talk about it. But to be honest, it's about the language. We're definitely not going to talk about chakras and meridians and all those sort of things in that world. So it's about being careful with the language. But the great thing is, research is catching up in many
Mm.
ways. Over the last decade, there's been some amazing research about the power of meditation, how it changes your brain, and then your so luckily, the science is catching up with meditation and mindfulness practices, and it's being more popularized over the last, let's say, 10 years, definitely. So people are more open to talk about it. I love it when I get the skeptic over the line. I love it when I get that person folding his arms and saying, "Well, I'm not sure about this stuff, Melo. I'm not really sure." And then 1 week later, they're ambassadors and they absolutely love it. And they say, "I don't know how I lived without it." So I love that. That's my job.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute because from a I'm a marketer. We help coaches to market. From a business and marketing point of view, you've hit the nail on the head there with moving into high performance individuals, industries that are still pretty masculine in nature and all just results driven, grind, hustle, close the deal. And you're going in and talking about mindfulness, training your attention. You've got a successful business working with these people. How does that process take place of you beginning to work with them? And I suppose, what's your pitch to these companies as to why they should work with you?
Yeah, again, I'm careful with the language depending on the company and industry. So I work with a whole range of Fortune 500 companies in many ways, anything from L'Oreal to Seek to the PwCs, the Deloitte. So it is about languaging, getting the right language in there. If you put the title mental health or burnout or mindfulness in the flyer, let's say, or in your comms, most people won't come. But if you put the outcome being high performance, high achiever, all of the being energized, all these things, they'll come along to the session. So that's the first point, to break that barrier. Once I get them in the room, in whether it is virtually, whether it is in face to face, I'll talk about the science of it. So I'll break down the neuroscience of it, how practicing meditation deactivates the amygdala, the fight and flight response, how it fires up the prefrontal cortex, and how it helps you to be a problem solver, think, which ultimately helps you be, it improves your cognition, which ultimately helps your business. Then I get them over the line. Once I get them over the line, then we'll do a little practice. And the little practice could be as short as 90 seconds. It could be a 90-second break. It could be a 2-minute practice. And then they feel it and experience it. Most people in that one practice will say, oh, I feel better, I feel calmer. Well, I feel tired. I didn't realize I was tired until I actually stopped. Because most people running their own business, entrepreneurs, myself being a bit, usually don't give ourselves permission to stop. We usually just keep trying to move at this unrelenting pace. And sometimes to be more productive, the very thing you need to do is stop and pause. Pause for 5 minutes, and then your next 2 hours will be more productive. So once I get over that line, that might be a one session there. Then they're sold. Some of the biggest skeptics have been my biggest converts. Some companies that have said, I'm not really sure about this, have made my training mandatory across the whole company. So it's actually part of their induction when they join the company. Yeah, and I love it. I love it when months later I get a message from somebody, or somebody bumps into me in the streets of Melbourne and says, "Hey, Melo, you did that, lunch and learn for us, 3 years ago, and I've got to tell you, it saved my marriage, or it helped my family, or it helped me through cancer. I got cancer shortly after. And those techniques that you taught me, even though they were very simple, they helped me. So I love that. That's why I love doing the work that I do.
I'll bet. I'll bet, man. That's really, really great. I love hearing those stories, and it's really cool that you figured out a way to break through these corporate
Mm.
environments, which are tough from a marketing sense to break into, because they got so many plates spinning, and I imagine so many people pitching them all the time. Really interesting how you said, don't put burnout and mindfulness in the offer, just put the outcomes there. Something we talk about a
Mm.
lot. You don't sell the seats on the plane, you sell the villa in Bali, that sort of thing. No one really
Yeah.
cares how they get there. Well, that brings us onto your book really nicely, which I notice in your book you have put, you've broken your own rules, and you've called it Beating Burnout: Mindful Lessons for a Meaningful Life. But that's more for everyone. It's not just for a corporate audience. And you've mentioned that you combine science and practices and your own techniques. So I'm going to expand on what you just talked about and say that I'm a busy business owner. I've got the twin toddlers that we talked about before. I know I'm not short on time. I'm short on alone time. And I'm sure you hear this quite often as an objection as to why people cannot be mindful. So, could you help people like myself, the quote, too busy people out there, as to why, firstly, that's not a good enough excuse not to practice mindfulness, and a couple of these simple practices that we can use to get started every day?
Sure, definitely. Like I said before, even just stopping for 90 seconds. So doing a 90-second practice where you actually interrupt your busyness in many ways. So it's all about creating space in your day, creating space. So we're not machines. We cannot keep going 24 hours a day in this, it's called beta mode, when you're in this sympathetic nervous system, thinking, planning, problem solving, decision making, running your business, looking after your family, all those things. We cannot keep going like that without any consequence. The window of peak performance is around about 2 hours, and then your attention starts waning. So else, every 2 hours, just check in with yourself. How do I feel right now? How's my energy? How's my vitality? How's my clarity? And if need be, stop for a minute. Maybe you take a walk around the block. Maybe you go pat the dog. Maybe you go do something just to break that busyness. 90-second breath break, following your breath for 90 seconds will help you to deactivate that stress. and help you to reset. The other thing I would say is to create crystal clear boundaries between work and home. Like, am I working or am I homing? Because chances are, when you're home, you're still thinking about work. So chances are you're with the kids, but are you really with the kids? Is your mind really there? So a good way to do that is to create a spacer. They call it the third space, where you finish work, you close all the tabs on the computer, you close everything you need to do, you close all the tabs in your head, you do a short practice again that actually says, I'm signing off, I'm turning off now. And by the time you go upstairs to the kids, or drive home to the kids, create that space. The car, if you're driving the car, stopping in the driveway for 2 minutes before you actually walk into the house, and then say to yourself when you're entering the house, I'm home now and I'm with the kids. I'm fully present. So it's a little space that you need to create, because sometimes we can bring our work home or our energy home, and the kids feel it. They know when they're sort of tugging for your attention and you're on the phone or you're texting or doing something, they feel it. So creating crystal clear boundaries, really important.
Yeah, it takes a certain amount of confidence to do that in your business, doesn't it? I feel like I had a bit of this epiphany last year where I noticed that now that I had kids, my problem was that my business is here on my phone, it's
Yeah,
here on my laptop, and on the other side of that wall there, that's where my daughters are playing right now. And so if I go out to get a coffee or go to the bathroom or anything, my kids are there. And to separate home and work, especially in remote working situations, which so many people are experiencing now, can be extraordinarily tough. That
yeah,
spacer moment, that's one I haven't heard before, because
yeah,
I'm quite good at being phones off when I'm with the kids, or the phone stays in the pocket firmly if we're at the dinner table, that sort of thing. I'm pretty good at that most of the time, but definitely that spacer is something I need to work on, and I really thank you for that one, Melo. So
yeah,
the other one that I suppose is on what I said before about confidence. A lot of people coming up in their business, they're watching Gary Vaynerchuk, Grant Cardone, Logan Paul, YouTubers work all
yeah,
day, 18 hours a day. I grind, and these motivational speakers who just shout about how hard they work, and they believe this is what they're meant to do. And when they're not at the level of income they're at, it can obviously feel extraordinarily, I suppose, incongruent with your goals to be sitting
mm,
down and not working. So, can you help us to get over that guilt factor that new entrepreneurs may feel when they are not working, uh, even though they don't have the results that they currently want?
yeah. Working 80 hours a week or 100 hours a week doesn't mean you're being productive in many ways. So you could work 1 hour of focused work, where you've had a break, you've done a meditation, you've set your intentions, and you're really focused on that job at hand. Post 3 hours of like and fatigue and exhaustion. So, the longer you tip that balance, I coach a lot of surgeons, and a lot of surgeons are guilty of this. They actually work 80-hour weeks, 70-hour weeks. They're doing long, surgical lists, and then they have to do all the admin that goes with that. So one of the things that I teach them is basically, again, to take any break they can, any space they can possibly get in their day, but to also reclaim an afternoon for themselves. Reclaim 2 hours or 3 hours where they're not seeing patients, where they're not seeing clients. And this is the time for sort of working on themselves, working on their business, working, instead of in their business, working on their business. And yes, they are running businesses, even though they're surgeons and they're busy surgeons. So 80 hours of work does not mean productive. I had one particular client who was actually boasting about his 90 hours that he used to work, or all nighters that he used to do. He worked multi-millionaire, working across multiple time zones, and working in the airport, working in the when he got to the other place, laptop out, and his body says, "No, nah, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm just stopping." And it actually shut down. He ended up in intensive care. His body stopped producing testosterone. All his organs, started failing, had multiple organ failure, and he was in a bad shape. So it took something like that for him to realize. And this is what I've realized, with researching this book, for example. I interviewed about 200 people for this book, entrepreneurs, leaders, CEOs, executives, whole range of people. And 90% of the people that I interviewed didn't realize they were burning out until it was too late. They didn't realize until it was some sort of crisis or some sort of panic attack or some sort of physiological breakdown, because that's the consequence of trying to work, non-stop. And entrepreneurs are, and startups and small businesses are the worst at this because they feel that every hour counts, every minute counts. But we have to change that mindset and say, well, if I stop, my 2 hours will be. If I take an
Mm.
afternoon off of a week and work and get creative, so there's different modes to work in too, working in a creative way too, creating new ideas, stepping back from the business, looking at the way you're working. Maybe there's things that you're doing that can be eliminated, automated, delegated, and you're doing these unsustainable, crazy hours. So taking a step back, looking at it, give yourself permission to take breaks, and claim that. My advice for the young ones starting there and in the startup sort of phase there, and you've got these hours, put a stake in the ground now, protect your and guard your time.
Mm.
Guard yourself an hour. Put some buffers here and there. Book in a meeting with yourself every day, just to sort of get out of that busyness, and you'll be far more successful. I promise you.
I did that in my calendar last year, mate. I just put blocks of time when I wasn't available,
Yeah,
and I and I have no phone calls after 4 and no phone calls before 10, and no phone calls on Friday. Huge
good.
change, especially the Friday one, because nothing worse than doing a call on a Friday afternoon that just adds to your to-do list. So you go into the weekend where I've got to be full dad mode and I've got this huge list of tasks to get done. And it increases that anxiety over the stuff you haven't done yet. So the no calls on Fridays was one of these boundaries that I had a coach who, challenged me to do this. And I did it with resistance, and it was a
Yeah,
hugely important thing. And now it's just, part of my life now. Fridays I don't take calls, and everyone's better off for it because I get more stuff done because on Fridays I've got time to do the things I said I would do. Because we're in a delivery-based business. So it's
yeah,
interesting the 100-hour work weeks because before I was in, the online space, I was actually in hospitality and I was a chef for about 10 years, and I worked my way up to these bigger and better restaurants. And when I was kind of at the quote top of my game, I noticed that the the more successful the restaurant and the higher quality, the less happy the head chefs were. For the most part,
yeah,
they were the most incredible chefs, technically I'd seen, but they looked tired. They drank and smoked. No judgment on people who drink and smoke. I love a drink. And I just had this realization that, like, there was almost a badge of honor around how much they worked, and it was like this big macho dick swinging competition about who worked the hardest and who was the best. And I remember hosing down some non-slip mats on the back stairs at like 1 a.m. after being there since 7 a.m. Just thinking there must be a better way to make a living than this. And out of 10 years of cooking, that one moment stuck with me so much as this
yeah,
epiphany of these guys are top of their game, but they are not happy. And the environment in that kitchen was bitchy. Everyone was one upping each other rather than working as a team. And actually, when I went down to more relaxed environments, everyone was happier. You started to see people with an actual shape to their body rather than being stick thin,
yeah,
or massively overweight. Less people taking cigarette breaks, less people coming in hungover, and while while they were not ticking the same boxes professionally,
yeah,
enormously happier quality of life. And so
yeah.
that's not really so much of a question, just an anecdote from my life. But when I
No, no,
realized
yeah.
that,
No,
yeah,
I understand what you're talking about, and chefs are notorious for that. They're famous. Some of the best French chefs in the world. They're always grumpy. They're always like swearing and all those sort of things. But the misconception of working many hours is something we need to sort of change the mindset around. It doesn't have to be hard. It really doesn't. sometimes, and especially when you practice mindfulness techniques, you're in that flow state. Everything seems to be easy. It's almost too easy. It's like this should be a bit harder because we've been told, life's not meant to be easy. We've been told that you've got to work so many hours. It's got to be tough. All those sort of things. But it doesn't have to be. When you're in the flow state and everything seems, like seamlessly easy, that's when you're at your best. That's
Mm.
peak performance. An athlete would describe it like that. I coach a lot of athletes, including Olympic athletes, and when they're at their best, it's just easy. When they're at the best, be present, and it's just like effortless. It should be effortless.
Do you believe that? Do you subscribe much to manifestation and the law of attraction as part of what you do?
A little bit, the good old Secret movie and all those things.
Yeah.
All of that. Visualization is great in a way, like visualization and manifestation and affirmations, but none of it's any good unless you take action.
Mm.
Unless you
Yeah.
implement, and that's a big thing. I coach an associate professor, cardiovascular surgeon who knows more than me by far. And I thought when I started coaching this guy, I thought, how can I teach this guy anything? How can I actually help him? He's written a book on most of the things that I teach. He's written papers. He lectures around the world globally. But then when I looked at it, I thought he knows everything theoretically, but he doesn't implement any of it into his life. He actually doesn't do the practices. There is zero after himself. He knows what he needs to do, but he doesn't do it. So just knowing it and just trying to manifest it is not enough. We actually have to take action. We have to implement the practices. And that's why I say, even just doing a 90-second breath break or doing a 5-minute practice every day or stopping every now and again just to check in with yourself, you're starting to implement those things and take action. If nothing is, your effort defines you, not what you just know. This guy knew it. This guy knows everything about everything. When I started talking to him, he's, oh yeah, I wrote the book about that. I wrote a paper on that. I did this. Like, wow, you know it, but you actually, it's common sense, but common sense isn't always common practice.
The walk the talk.
Yeah,
Right? And
yeah.
so many coaches are not doing that. It's a very funny industry. Um, Mate, so I know you've got a sensational book and you've got a lot of content out there.
Mm.
Obviously, my busy dad, business owner, book resistance comes up. When am I going to sit down and read a book? Are there any resources that you've got that we can look into now? Just some more bite-sized pieces that we can start to absorb and get ourselves further down your funnel into ultimately getting your book and doing the Melo Calarco method. Calarco.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Happily, I can share with you a link. I'm on an app called Insight Timer, which is totally free, and there's I've got
Yes.
about 5 or 6 meditations on there. I'd recommend starting with the body scan. The body scan meditation is great, so I'll share that link with you. But the book itself is actually designed. It's actually designed to be also implementable and digestible in small pieces. So it's actually only 9 chapters, and each chapter will tell a story from my travel. So for example, the guerrillas in Rwanda, or a situation where I had machine guns in my ribs, or whatever it was, and the lesson that I learned from that. So what I learned from that situation, and then how that can help you. So the lesson that imparts for the reader. With the book itself is a little bit, take a tip, practice it. So each chapter also has a little tip at the end, a little homework tip to do that you can implement and practice. So yes, you don't have to read the whole book cover to cover, because there's probably 1 or 2 tips that you take out of there, and I guarantee you, they will save you and help you for the rest of your life. So it's a pretty easily implementable. And by the way, to help you that might be time poor and other people, there is an audio book coming out in about 3 weeks, 1st of April. There's an audio book coming out, so you can listen to it and ingest it while you're doing other things, going for a walk there. So, yeah, or also jump onto my website, melocalarco.com. I'm sure you'll probably put it in the show notes. I won't spell. There's lots of resources. You can download a sample chapter. You can have a little look at that. There's a great story there about how I meditated for 12 hours. Actually, I was stuck in a storm, and the only place I could go was within. I won't share the story now. I won't spoil it for you. So there's a sample chapter there you can also read. I'm sure if you dig hard, you'll find something. Like I said, the app, Insight Timer. jump onto my website, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also sharing lots of tips and tricks on there, and also another way you can actually connect with me. So my mission is to help as many people as possible. So however I can get that across, please ask questions.
I can tell, mate, and I'm sure you've helped a lot of people so far. While that feels like the wrap up of the podcast, I just got to mention that Insight Timer is an app that I completely forgot about, which is why I went, yes, when you mentioned it. I was using that during 2018 when my wife and I were living in our worst apartment to date. I was driving a car with that I got for free from my mate, unregistered car with a crack in the windscreen and a hole in the floor. We're living in this apartment where we were stealing Wi-Fi from the cafe downstairs, and our washing machine ran into our bath. So you'd be having a shower, and then you get all this grey water on your feet. And at the time, business was shocking, as is probably obvious, and we were also planning our wedding. And I was in this phenomenon where I started getting physically hung up on sales calls for the first time ever. Like every call I did, so I must have been highly burnt out, highly stressed about all this stuff. And then, the mini schnapps bottles weren't the right color and the cupcake icing was wrong, all this nonsense. And we live near the beach, and I downloaded Insight Timer because of how short those meditations were, how accessible it was, how kind of entry level it was. And so, you know, I as a self-confessed personal development fraud, where I do very little of it, little of it myself, Insight Timer is super, super handy, and I'm
Yeah.
really glad to hear you're on there, mate. So,
Yes, there's
Melo,
thousands of meditations on there. By the way, if you don't like my voice, there's another 60,000 to choose from, or 600,000. I'm not even sure. So if you don't like my voice, I'll share the link with mine. But there's female voices. There's all sorts of different people. So jump on there. It's a great free app, great free resource.
100%, man, and you've absolutely nailed it. Really appreciate you coming on to share some stories today, some tangible advice. I will definitely be getting that free chapter and the audiobook as well, because that's my alone time, is my evening walks as well. That's where I kind of go within whilst getting into my body as well. Melo Calarco, thank you so much for being on the show today, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Alex. Really appreciate it. Stay well. Hope you feel better soon.
We're getting there, mate. We're getting there. And for everyone listening, whether live or on the recording, we love you to bits for that. I'll be back next week with another incredible guest on Coaches to the Moon. Until then, thanks for listening. Much love and peace out.